Alright guys, chapter 7, cellular structure and function. This video will do section 1. It will cover cell discovery and cell theory, so let's dive right in. Our essential questions: how are the advances in microscope technology related to discoveries about cells? What are the similarities and differences between compound light microscopes and electron microscopes? What are the principles of cell theory? And what are the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells? Here's the vocab. If you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do so now. So, the history of cells. Well, first, let's say what a cell is. It's the basic structural and functional unit of a living thing. Okay, all living things are made of cells. If you go smaller than a cell, it's not something that's truly alive. It can't function on its own. Okay, the existence of cells was not known until the inventions of microscopes, because they were so small that they could not be seen with the naked eye. So, the history of the cell, we didn't know about it until we invented microscopes. Okay, microscopes are how we study cells, how we study that basic structural functional unit of all living things. Okay, there are 3 parts of the cell theory. It is one fundamental idea of modern biology, and it includes three main points. Okay, all living things are made of cells, whether that is one single cell or more than one cell. All living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and organization of all living organisms. That means if it's not made of cells, it's not alive. It's not truly alive. And cells arise from previously existing cells. Okay, so cells come from other cells. They don't just pop into being. They have to come from a cell that already exists. Scientists are trying to figure out where that first one came from. They're doing some interesting research with it, but they haven't figured it out. Okay. Also, those pre-existing cells, they pass on genetic material to the new cells, to the new daughter cells. So they pass on DNA. Okay, those are the 3 parts of the cell theory. Those are very important. That I can guarantee will be on the test. So make sure that you know those 3 parts of the cell theory. Microscope technology. There are 2 main categories: compound light microscopes and electron microscopes. Compound light microscopes are the kind of microscopes that we have here at school, and they use a series of glass lenses and visible light to magnify images. They can magnify something up to 1,000 times its actual size. The ones that we have here at school go up to about 400 times larger, I believe. But a really good, expensive one can do up to 1,000. Electron microscopes are a lot more complicated. They're a lot more expensive too. They create an image by illuminating a sample with a beam of electrons. And hopefully you remember that electrons are negatively charged subatomic particles. So they shoot the sample with a beam of electrons, and then they collect them whenever they bounce back. So collecting the electrons that are reflected from the sample helps create an image in a computer. And this can magnify the subject, the sample, up to 500,000 times its actual size. So that allows scientists to see very small things in very great detail. Switching gears a little bit, basic cell types. Okay, there are 2 types, but they have one common trait. They have a plasma membrane that controls what goes in and what goes out of the cell. Okay, it is a special boundary that controls what enters and leaves the cell. It lets good things in and keeps bad things out. That's its whole job, to control what goes in and out of the cell. Most cells contain genetic material in some form. Most cells break down molecules to generate energy. I actually don't know any that don't. Their main source of energy is sugar, which you'll remember is a carbohydrate. And that's the main source that they get their energy from. Now, these cells can be broken down into 2 categories: eukaryotic and prokaryotic. We're going to describe each of those in detail. We're going to start with eukaryotic cells. They contain a nucleus and other organelles. So the nucleus is that central region that contains the genetic material and directs the function and what the cell does. Okay, so if the cell needs to do something, the nucleus is going to tell it to do it. Eukaryotic cells also have organelles, which are specialized structures that perform specific functions. So they are distinct regions of the cell that have a specific job. They have one job to do, and when the nucleus tells them to do it, they do it. Eukaryotic cells are generally much larger than prokaryotic cells. We're going to talk about prokaryotic cells. Now, they are cells that are very small, without a nucleus and without other membrane-bound organelles. Okay? They are smaller and more simple than eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes, and they were probably the first organisms that lived on Earth. Origin of cell diversity. So scientists think that eukaryotic cells have evolved from prokaryotic cells. Now, just a brief segue to talk about the naming of these cells. The prefix pro means before, and in Latin, karyote means kernel or nucleus. So prokaryotic cells are cells that existed before the nucleus developed, so they do not have a nucleus. So prokaryote, pro-kernel, pro-nucleus, all right, before nucleus. The prefix eu means true. Karyote still means kernel or nucleus, so eukaryotic cells have a true nucleus. All right, so back on topic. The endosymbiotic theory proposes that a symbiotic relationship formed between two prokaryotic cells, one of which lived inside the other one. Okay, hopefully you remember what the word symbiotic means from earlier in the year. That is when two organisms develop a close relationship. This relationship would have been a mutualistic relationship where both of them benefit. Scientists believe that a large prokaryotic cell basically swallowed or engulfed a smaller one, and they started helping each other out. And eventually, they came to depend on each other so much that they couldn't function alone, and that became the first eukaryotic cell. Because eukaryotic cells are larger and more complex, they have developed specific functions, and that led to cell diversity, and that cell diversity led to differences in organisms. So that allowed the organism to have different types of cells that work together to make one whole individual. Okay, we have lots of different types of cells in our body because we have cell diversity. My liver cell looks different than my heart cell or a skin cell or a neuron. Okay, all of those cells have a different structure, so they have a different job within the body. Okay, and that's it. So hopefully by the end, by now, you can answer these 4 questions and you know what these vocabulary terms are. If you have any questions, let me know.